Racist Millionaire tried to humiliate a black taxi driver, but his reply in Arabic left him speechless. The night city was buzzing with neon lights and the hum of traffic, but for Malik, the black taxi driver, it was just another long shift behind the wheel. His cab smelled faintly of old leather and the faint citrus spray he used every morning. It was a modest job, far removed from the life he once imagined for himself, but it paid the bills and allowed him to take care of his younger brother back home. To Malik, dignity mattered more than wealth, and his dignity came from working hard and honestly. That night, however, fate had prepared something different. The call came through his dispatcher, an urgent pickup from the high-end district where marble lobbies gleamed and cars worth more than houses lined the streets. Malik's cab looked out of place as it pulled up to the towering glass building, but he parked in front, waiting. Out stepped a man whose very presence oozed arrogance, a wealthy businessman, dressed in an immaculate tailored suit. His watch caught the streetlight like a blade of silver. This was Charles Whitmore, a man who prided himself not only on his money but on the way he reminded others of what they supposedly lacked. From the moment Charles climbed into the backseat, the imbalance of power was obvious. He sank into the leather, glanced at Malik through the glass divider, and smirked. His tone carried a weight of superiority, as though even giving directions to a driver was beneath him. The ride began in tense silence, broken only by Charles tapping his phone and chuckling to himself. Malik kept his focus on the road, unbothered, until he heard a sharp laugh from behind. Charles wasn't just talking on the phone. He was mocking. It started subtle, questions that seemed harmless but were laced with venom. He asked Malik where he was really from, making assumptions about his background. His words turned into pointed remarks about people like him, who ended up driving taxis instead of doing something respectable. Every insult was carefully sharpened, like a knife testing skin. And Charles enjoyed it. He leaned forward, laughing louder, treating the ride as his personal stage. To him, Malik wasn't a human being. He was a target to be belittled. What Charles didn't know was that Malik carried with him a story that went far beyond the steering wheel. He wasn't just a driver. He had lived in 3 countries, survived wars, studied languages, and carried scars no wealthy man could imagine. He had knowledge that didn't show in bank accounts, but in resilience and wisdom. The insults grew louder as the cab wove through the streets. Charles began mocking Malik's skin color directly, turning it into the kind of cruelty that drew blood without ever lifting a hand. And then, as though humiliation weren't enough, Charles tried to demonstrate his superiority in another way. He switched to Arabic phrases he had half-learned from a business trip years ago, stringing them together in a twisted parody. His words were clumsy, mispronounced, and offensive, but his smirk made clear his intent. He thought Malik wouldn't understand. He thought the driver was just another man to trample. But that was the mistake that would change everything. Malik's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. For the first time in the ride, he let his expression change. Not with anger, but with something Charles couldn't yet read. Quiet strength. Quiet intelligence. The silence stretched, heavy, until the cab reached a red light. And that's when Malik finally decided to answer. Not in English. Not in silence. But in flawless, commanding Arabic. The words rolled off his tongue with precision and depth. The kind of mastery that only years of study and immersion could give. His voice filled the car, steady but sharp. Each word slicing through the Millionaire's. Arrogance like glass shattering on marble. Charles froze. The smirk vanished. His phone slipped slightly in his hand. Because Malik wasn't just answering. He was revealing something Charles never expected. The driver he tried to humiliate was fluent in the very language he had desecrated. And Malik wasn't done. This wasn't just a reply. This was the beginning of a lesson that Charles Whitmore, with all his money, power, and arrogance, would never forget. The cab's interior grew heavy with tension. The hum of the city outside, honking cars, pedestrians crossing, neon lights flickering, all faded beneath the echo of Malik's flawless Arabic. For a moment, Charles Whitmore, the millionaire who loved to own every room he walked into, sat motionless. His jaw, once curved into that smug smirk, was now slack. His eyes darted from the driver's reflection in the mirror to the back of Malik's head, as though searching for proof that what he'd just heard was real. The arrogance that once filled the car evaporated, replaced by something Charles rarely felt, vulnerability. Malik didn't raise his voice. He didn't turn around. His words were calm but carried a razor's edge. His mastery of Arabic wasn't academic or rehearsed. It was lived, breathed, natural. He spoke with the precision of someone who had grown up hearing the language, absorbing its rhythm, its music, its soul. Charles tried to laugh it off at first. A nervous chuckle slipped through his lips, as though he could reduce the moment to a misunderstanding, a joke gone too far. But deep down, a realization clawed at him. He had made a fool of himself. Malik, however, wasn't interested in humiliation for humiliation's sake. His reply had been deliberate, not just to shut down the racist mockery, but to shift the balance of power. And that balance shifted so suddenly, so violently, that Charles now felt like a man hanging from a ledge he thought was solid ground. The cab rolled forward as the light turned green, but the silence inside was deafening. Charles cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably in the leather seat that just moments ago had felt like a throne. He glanced out the window, searching for a distraction, but all he saw were ordinary people living ordinary lives he had long believed, himself far above. And then Malik spoke again. This time, in English. His tone was steady, professional, but the words cut deeper than anything Charles had ever heard. He reminded Charles of what he had done, mocking not just a man, but a people, a culture, a language steeped in centuries of history and resilience. Malik didn't shout. He didn't need to. The weight of truth carried more force than any raised voice ever could. Charles felt his chest tighten. For the first time in years, he wasn't the one controlling the narrative. He wasn't the one pulling the strings. He was the one being exposed. But Malik's story wasn't finished. As they drove through the city, Malik began weaving pieces of his past into the ride, not to boast, but to make it clear who Charles had underestimated. He spoke of growing up in a community where languages intertwined, where survival often meant knowing how to move between worlds seamlessly. He explained how Arabic had been part of his education, not as a luxury, but as a necessity, a bridge between cultures, a tool for survival, a means of connecting with people who had once been strangers. Every word was a revelation to Charles. To him, language was a transaction, a tool for deals and power to Malik. It was life itself, proof of resilience, adaptability, intelligence. The irony cut deeper with each passing block. Charles had mocked Malik for being just a driver, blind to the reality that intelligence doesn't always sit in boardrooms or wear tailored suits. Sometimes, it's behind the wheel of a taxi, carrying stories richer than any stock portfolio. Charles shifted again, his expensive cufflinks glinting under the streetlights. For the first time, they looked less like symbols of wealth and more like shackles, reminders of how empty his power seemed in the face of real substance. The cab turned down a quieter street now, lined with older buildings and small shops still glowing in the night. The city had slowed, but the storm inside Charles hadn't. His mind raced. Should he apologize? Should he stay silent? Every option felt like losing, and Charles Whitmore had never learned how to lose. But Malik had no interest in his apology, not yet. He wasn't finished teaching the lesson. As they neared a red light, Malik glanced into the mirror once more, locking eyes with Charles. And then he switched languages again, this time into another tongue entirely. Smooth, fluid, confident. Charles's breath caught. Another language? How many did this man know? The truth landed like a hammer. The man he had ridiculed wasn't just intelligent. He was extraordinary. And now, Charles couldn't escape the creeping realization that Malik wasn't the one exposed tonight. It was him. The ride stretched on, but the silence inside the taxi was thick, crackling with the tension left behind by the millionaire's earlier arrogance. The man, sitting in the backseat with his expensive watch glinting under the dim city lights, thought he had already won. He believed his joke at the expense of the driver had reduced the man to nothing more than a background figure, a disposable service worker. He leaned back with the smug ease of someone who had lived his entire life unchallenged. But what the millionaire didn't know was that the driver's silence wasn't submission. It was calculation. The driver had seen men like him before, men who believed their wealth and whiteness gave them the authority to trample on dignity. And though he had been insulted, the driver wasn't broken. Instead, his mind sharpened like a blade being drawn from its sheath. The city streets blurred past, But inside the car, something was shifting. The driver's posture, calm but firm, carried an unspoken weight that the millionaire failed to notice. His dark eyes reflected both patience and power, as though he was simply waiting for the right moment to strike back, not with fists or anger, but with something far deadlier, truth. The millionaire began scrolling through his phone, muttering under his breath about a business deal in Dubai, unaware that his every careless word was feeding into the trap he was building for himself. He bragged about his upcoming negotiations with Arab investors, mocking their culture, their traditions, and even their language. His tone dripped with superiority, as though he saw the entire Middle East as nothing more than a chessboard on which he could buy and sell influence. And all the while, the driver listened. Every syllable, every word, every insult collected in his mind like pieces of ammunition. The car slowed as they approached a stretch of highway, neon signs glowing above them. The night seemed to lean closer, listening, waiting. The driver gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles firm but steady, and a quiet smirk flickered across his face. One the millionaire was too absorbed in his ego to notice. The irony was almost poetic. The man who thought himself untouchable was about to be undone, not by force, but by his own ignorance. When the millionaire finally put down his phone, he decided he needed fresh entertainment. He leaned forward slightly, sneering at the driver's reflection in the rearview mirror. "Tell me something, driver." His voice oozed arrogance. "You people, do you even know what it means to negotiate with men of real power? I bet you couldn't even say 2 words to them in their own tongue." The insult wasn't subtle anymore. It was deliberate, sharp, and meant to remind the driver of his place. But instead of flinching, the driver's lips curved upward ever so slightly, almost invisible in the rear view. His heart didn't race with anger, it steadied with purpose. Because what the millionaire had just done was walk straight into the exact battlefield the driver had mastered long ago. The air grew heavy as the taxi turned toward the heart of the city, skyscrapers towering in the distance. The driver's mind began to flash through memories, long nights of study, hours spent mastering languages not for applause, but for survival. Arabic, in particular, wasn't just a subject to him. It was a key he had once needed to open doors no one expected him to reach. He thought back to the years he had spent in university overseas, navigating cultures that many back home dismissed as foreign or intimidating. He remembered the laughter of Arab professors when he first attempted to mimic their accent, the nights he had stayed awake practicing calligraphy and syntax until it became as natural to him as breathing. His fluency wasn't just academic, it was born out of respect, discipline, and an understanding of identity, deeper than men like the millionaire could ever comprehend. Now, that hidden strength hummed under his skin, ready to surface. The driver knew he had to time this perfectly. Retaliation wasn't enough. It had to sting so deeply that the millionaire would never forget it. It had to be humiliating, undeniable, and public. And so, with deliberate calm, he stayed quiet just a little longer, letting the millionaire revel in his false victory. The car reached a red light, and for the first time, the driver turned his head ever so slightly, his gaze locking with the man in the back. It was subtle, but in that instant, the power dynamic shifted. The driver's eyes no longer carried the patience of a man enduring insult. They carried the confidence of a man holding a secret that could shatter the fragile illusion of superiority sitting smugly in the backseat. The millionaire didn't notice. Or perhaps, deep down, he felt something stir, a prickling unease that made him look away toward the window. Because pride is blinding, and arrogance deafens a man to the storm gathering right before him. The driver's silence was the eye of that storm. And soon, very soon, the reply in Arabic, sharp, eloquent, undeniable, would tear through the air and leave the millionaire, not just speechless, but exposed. He thought this was just another ride, another moment of amusement at someone else's expense. But in reality, he was sitting in the courtroom of dignity, and the man he mocked as a mere taxi driver was about to become his judge, jury, and executioner. The city light turned green. The taxi surged forward, and with it, the driver prepared to deliver the blow that would collapse the millionaire's Empire of pride in a single breath. The car rolled to a stop outside the glittering entrance of the luxury hotel. Valets in crisp uniforms waited in neat lines, the golden lights from chandeliers spilling onto the marble steps like liquid fire. The millionaire reached for the door handle, ready to step out into the world he believed he owned. But before he could move, something unexpected happened. The driver turned his head. For the first time during the entire ride, he didn't avert his eyes, didn't bow his head or act invisible the way the millionaire expected. Instead, he held the man's gaze through the rearview mirror. It wasn't defiance in his stare, it was something more unnerving, calm authority, the kind that comes from deep self-assurance. Then, without warning, the driver spoke. Not in English. The words spilled into the air like a river breaking through a dam, rich, fluid, and commanding. It was Arabic. Not hesitant or broken, but pure and flawless. The kind that rolled with the rhythm of a native speaker. The driver's tone was steady, his enunciation sharp, every syllable a precise strike. And it wasn't random chatter. He was repeating the exact joke the millionaire had made earlier. The same insult that dripped with mockery, but he twisted it back, reshaping it into a lesson, one the millionaire could no longer escape. What had once been cruel was now transformed into something devastatingly clear. The effect was immediate. The millionaire froze in place, his arrogant smirk dissolving as recognition hit him like a blow. His jaw went slack. His hand, still on the door handle, trembled slightly before falling back into his lap. For years, he had wielded Arabic as a party trick, a tool to impress business partners or belittle those he deemed beneath him. But now he realized, with crushing clarity, that he was in the presence of someone who spoke it not as a performance, but as living truth. The cadence of the driver's voice carried more than fluency. It carried dignity, history, and an unshakable sense of pride. Each word seemed to strip away the layers of arrogance the millionaire had wrapped himself in, leaving him exposed. The silence that followed was unbearable. Outside, a valet had already opened the back door, waiting patiently for the passenger to step out. But the millionaire didn't move. He sat frozen in the leather seat, his face pale, his confidence shattered. Inside the cab, the driver finally fell silent. He didn't smirk, didn't gloat, didn't lean into the moment for victory. He simply turned his eyes back to the road ahead, his calm composure saying more than any insult ever could. For the first time in years, the millionaire didn't have the last word. The millionaire sat frozen in the backseat of the taxi, the polished marble steps of the luxury hotel just inches away. Outside, the valet continued to hold the door open, a look of confusion flickering across his face as the passenger failed to move. Guests in designer suits and glittering gowns swept past, their conversations a blur of laughter and champagne toasts. But inside the cab, time itself seemed to stop. The weight of what had just happened pressed down like an invisible storm. The millionaire's heart pounded in his chest. For years, he had relied on his fortune, his influence, his ability to humiliate others with casual cruelty. It had always worked. People laughed at his jokes, whether they found them funny or not. People obeyed him, whether they respected him or not. Money had always insulated him from consequence. But now, that insulation had been ripped away. The black taxi driver, with nothing more than his voice, had dismantled the very foundation of the millionaire's arrogance. His flawless command of Arabic wasn't just about language. It was about ownership. Ownership of culture. Ownership of dignity. Ownership of a truth the millionaire could never buy. No matter how many languages he dabbled in or how much wealth he flaunted, the driver hadn't needed to raise his voice or deliver some theatrical lecture. He had simply mirrored the man's own weapon back at him, polished, sharpened, and stripped of its poison. The humiliation was absolute. The millionaire swallowed hard, his throat dry. For the first time in his life, he realized that power didn't always look like dollar signs or boardrooms. Sometimes, power was sitting behind the wheel of a taxi, unassuming, quiet, until it chose to reveal itself. Slowly, almost mechanically, the millionaire reached for his wallet. He pulled out a thick wad of bills, intent on regaining control of the moment the only way he knew how, through money. He pushed it forward toward the driver, forcing a strained smile onto his face. But the driver didn't even glance at the cash. His hands remained steady on the wheel, his gaze fixed ahead. The refusal was wordless but thunderous. It was a rejection not just of the money, but of everything it represented. The millionaire's hand faltered, the bills trembling. A sharp wave of embarrassment flushed his face. In that instant, he understood. No amount of money could erase the sting of what he had just experienced. His wealth was meaningless here. Finally, the driver spoke again. This time it was in English, his voice calm but firm. A single sentence, quiet enough that only the man in the backseat could hear, yet powerful enough to echo for the rest of his life. Respect is earned, not bought. And with that, he unlocked the doors. The valet, still waiting, leaned in politely. The millionaire stumbled out of the cab, his legs unsteady as though the ground beneath him had shifted. The bright lights of the hotel, once symbols of his status, now felt harsh and exposing. Guests glanced at him, sensing something was off, but no one said a word. The taxi pulled away, disappearing into the city's rhythm. Its taillights faded into the distance, but the moment lingered like a scar across the millionaire's pride. He stood there, surrounded by wealth, yet feeling poorer than he ever had in his life. For the driver, it wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving superiority. It was about reclaiming dignity in the face of humiliation. About reminding someone who thought they were untouchable that every human being carries worth far greater than gold. And for the millionaire, it was a lesson he would never forget. His laughter, once booming and cruel, had been replaced by silence. A silence that followed him into the hotel ballroom, into his business meetings, and into the long, restless nights where he replayed the taxi ride over and over again. Because in that silence lived a truth too, powerful to ignore. The man he had tried to belittle had, without effort, revealed who truly held the upper hand. And it wasn't him.